I still remember the click of the confirmation email, the small, harmless sound it made on my phone late one evening while the city hummed outside my apartment window. It was the kind of email that felt heavier than it should have been, carrying with it a sense of arrival, of validation, of having crossed some invisible line I'd been skirting for years. "Thank you for your generous contribution," it said. "A table for 10 at the annual Hartwell Foundation Charity Gala." I reread it 3 times, not because I didn't understand it, but because I wanted to feel it settle into my bones. For the first time, I wasn't just donating quietly from the shadows. I was going to be there. For years, I'd watched the gala from afar, through glossy magazine spreads and social media posts filled with champagne flutes, tailored tuxedos, and women in dresses that cost more than my first car. The Hartwell Gala wasn't just an event, it was a signal. It told the world who mattered, who had influence, who belonged to the inner circle of donors and decision-makers shaping the city's future. And now, my name would be attached to a table. My table. I didn't come from that world. My wealth hadn't been inherited, hadn't been groomed into me through prep schools and summer homes. It had come slowly, stubbornly, through years of risk, sleepless nights, and a business I built from nothing but an idea and a refusal to quit. I told myself that buying the table wasn't about ego. It was about supporting a cause I believed in, about finally stepping forward instead of staying comfortably invisible. But if I'm honest, there was something else too. A quiet hope that this would be a bridge, a way into rooms I'd never been invited into before. I spent days thinking about who I would invite to sit at that table with me. I wanted people who had walked parts of the journey with me, who understood what it meant to struggle and then claw your way up. Old colleagues, a mentor who once took a chance on me, a friend who had lent me money when my bank account was nearly empty. I imagined us there together, not as outsiders peeking in, but as participants. Equals. The night I sent out the invitations, I felt oddly nervous, like I was hosting my first dinner party all over again. The responses came quickly. Gratitude, excitement, disbelief. One message said, "I never thought I'd see the inside of that gala." I smiled at that. Neither had I, not really, until now. In the weeks leading up to the event, the gala seemed to loom larger and larger in my mind. I found myself paying attention to details I'd never cared about before. I had a suit tailored, something classic and understated, because I didn't want to look like I was trying too hard. I rehearsed polite conversation in my head, imagining questions about my work, my philanthropy, my intentions. I told myself to stay grounded, to remember why I was going in the first place. The first hint that something was off came subtly, almost politely. An email from the gala coordinator asking to confirm details. It was standard, I thought, until I noticed the tone. Slightly cooler than before. More formal. Still, I brushed it off. These events were complex, and I was new to this side of things. I replied promptly, courteously, reaffirming my attendance and the names of my guests. Days passed without response. Then another email arrived, this one brief. "We'll be in touch." No signature. No warmth. A small knot formed in my stomach, but I told myself I was overthinking it. I'd paid. I'd been confirmed. That was that. The morning of the gala, I woke early, restless. Sunlight filtered through the curtains, and for a moment, everything felt possible. I checked my phone out of habit, expecting perhaps a final reminder or seating chart. Instead, there was an email with the subject line, "Regarding your attendance." I sat up in bed, heart suddenly pounding. The message was short, almost surgical in its precision. Due to unforeseen circumstances, they were unable to accommodate my table at the event. My contribution, of course, would be fully refunded or, if I preferred, redirected as a donation without attendance. There was an apology, carefully worded, devoid of real feeling. I read it again. And again. The words didn't change, but their meaning grew heavier each time. Unable to accommodate my table. Uninvited. Just like that. I felt heat rise to my face, a mix of confusion and something sharper, more painful. Embarrassment. Anger. Disbelief. I thought of the people I'd invited, the excitement in their messages, the plans they'd made. I thought of the suit hanging in my closet, tags still attached. I thought of all the times I'd stayed on the sidelines, telling myself it didn't matter, only to step forward now and be quietly pushed back. I replied immediately, asking for clarification. Surely there had been a mistake. I'd confirmed weeks ago. I'd complied with every request. The response came faster this time, but it offered no real explanation. Capacity issues. Logistical challenges. Regret. The word regret felt hollow. It didn't cover the sting of being erased so casually. I wasn't being loudly rejected. There was no confrontation, no dramatic scene. Just a polite removal, as if I'd never been meant to be there in the first place. As the day wore on, the reality sank in. I had to tell my guests. One by one, I sent messages explaining that the table had been canceled, that there had been a change of plans. I tried to keep it light, apologetic, professional. Some responded with understanding, others with thinly veiled confusion. One friend called me, her voice tight with anger on my behalf. "How can they do that?" she asked. I didn't have an answer. By evening, social media filled with photos from the gala. The same familiar faces, the same glittering ballroom, the same captions about generosity and community. I scrolled through them, feeling like I was watching a party through a locked window. Somewhere in that room, there would have been an empty space where my table should have been. Or maybe not. Maybe it had been given to someone else, someone who fit better, someone who didn't raise unspoken questions. That night, I sat alone in my apartment, the suit still unworn, the city lights blinking indifferently outside. I thought about all the times I'd been told that success was enough, that if you worked hard and did well, doors would open. But here was a door that had closed quietly, without even the courtesy of a reason. I wondered what it was about me that had made them uncomfortable. Was it my background? My lack of pedigree? The fact that my name didn't carry the right weight in the right circles? I had the money, clearly. But money, I was learning, wasn't always the currency that mattered most. Sleep came late, fractured by thoughts that wouldn't settle. By morning, the initial shock had dulled into something more contemplative. I replayed the events in my mind, searching for clues I might have missed. The coolness in the emails. The delay in responses. Had I been naive to think I could simply buy my way into a space that had been carefully guarded for generations? As the day unfolded, messages continued to arrive. Friends checking in. One guest admitted she'd suspected something was off when she couldn't find my name on the preliminary guest list posted online. Another mentioned a rumor she'd heard, something about the foundation wanting to curate their donor base more carefully this year. The word curate stuck with me. It implied selection, design, exclusion by intention. I began to see the situation not as a personal failure, but as a window into a world that operated by rules I hadn't fully understood. The gala wasn't just about charity. It was about maintaining a certain image, a certain hierarchy. And I, for all my success, didn't fit neatly into it. That realization hurt, but it also sparked something else. A quiet defiance. If I wasn't welcome at their table, maybe it was time to question why that table mattered so much to begin with. I thought about the cause itself, the people it was meant to help. I thought about how often charity became a performance, a way to signal virtue rather than effect real change. Over the next few days, I found myself having conversations I'd never had before. With my mentor, who reminded me that exclusion often says more about the gatekeepers than the ones left outside. With my friend who'd once lent me money, who laughed bitterly and said, "You don't need their approval." You never did. With myself, in the quiet moments when pride and disappointment wrestled for dominance. The refund came through automatically, the transaction as impersonal as the uninvitation. I stared at the number on my screen, wondering what to do with it. Donating it quietly would be easy. Redirecting it elsewhere would be simple. But something in me resisted the idea of just moving on as if nothing had happened. I wasn't sure yet what I would do. All I knew was that the gala had revealed something important, something I couldn't unsee. The charity table I bought had cost me more than money. It had forced me to confront the invisible lines that still divided us, even in spaces that preached generosity and inclusion. And as uncomfortable as that was, it also felt like the beginning of a different kind of reckoning, one that would shape what I chose to do next. The days after the gala passed in a strange haze, like the aftermath of a storm that hadn't made much noise, but had still rearranged everything inside me. Life went on as usual on the surface. Meetings were attended, emails were answered, deals were discussed. People spoke to me with the same respect they always had. Yet underneath it all, something had shifted. I was more aware now, more sensitive to the subtle signals I had once ignored. The pauses before replies. The careful wording. The way certain doors opened easily for some and remained stubbornly closed for others, no matter how hard you knocked. I stopped checking social media after a while. The images from the gala faded, replaced by the next cycle of curated perfection. But the feeling lingered. It followed me into quiet moments, like when I stood in line for coffee or stared out the window during a long drive. I kept returning to the same question. Why had I wanted to be there so badly in the first place? At first, I told myself it was about impact. The Hartwell Foundation did good work, or so I believed. They funded schools, clinics, programs that genuinely helped people. But if I was honest, there had been another layer. Being seen. Being recognized. Being counted among those whose presence mattered. I realized how deeply human that desire was and how dangerous it could become when tied to validation from institutions that thrived on exclusivity. One afternoon, a handwritten note arrived in the mail. It was unexpected, heavy cream paper with elegant script. It was from a woman I barely knew, someone I'd met once at a conference months earlier. She wrote that she'd heard about what happened. That word traveled fast in certain circles. She said she was sorry, not in the hollow way the gala organizers had been, but with a warmth that felt genuine. She added a line that stayed with me. Sometimes being turned away is a kind of protection. When I look back now, I can see that the uninvitation didn't just change where I donated my money, it changed how I understood power. Before, I had imagined power as something centralized, sitting neatly inside grand rooms with chandeliers and guarded guest lists. I thought proximity to those rooms meant influence. After everything that happened, that illusion slowly unraveled. Building my own table started quietly. There was no announcement, no press release. It began with conversations over coffee, phone calls that lasted longer than planned, introductions made without expectation of return. Someone would mention a problem they were struggling with, and instead of directing them to an application or a committee, I would ask, "What do you actually need right now?" Sometimes it was funding. Sometimes it was space. Sometimes it was simply someone to listen without judgment. The more I leaned into this way of giving, the more uncomfortable it made certain people. I noticed it in subtle ways. Invitations slowed down. My name appeared less often in conversations about major donors. At first, that stung. Then it amused me. Then, finally, it freed me. I realized how conditional that attention had been all along. One evening, I hosted a small gathering at my office. Nothing formal. Just food, mismatched chairs, and a room full of people who had never been in the same space before. A teacher sat next to a tech founder. A social worker debated ideas with an artist. They didn't agree on everything, but they listened. They challenged each other. By the end of the night, plans were forming organically, without anyone needing permission. As I watched them, a thought crossed my mind that startled me with its clarity. This is what they were afraid of. Not me. Not my money. But this. A model that didn't need their validation. I remembered the gala organizers' carefully worded emails, the way they had tried to make exclusion sound administrative. Capacity issues. Logistics. Regret. What they hadn't said was that systems like theirs depended on scarcity, on the idea that belonging was something to be rationed. Once people realized they could create meaning without those systems, the illusion weakened. Months later, I ran into someone I recognized from the foundation at a conference. We exchanged polite greetings. There was an awkward pause, the unspoken history hanging between us. Finally, they said, "I heard you've been doing interesting things lately." The word interesting was loaded, cautious. I smiled and said, "I've been doing what makes sense to me." That was all. I didn't need to explain. For the first time, I didn't feel the urge to prove anything. That night, alone with my thoughts, I considered how close I had come to measuring my worth by an invitation. How easily I had accepted the idea that legitimacy came from being seen in the right places. It frightened me, realizing how seductive that thinking was and how many people never questioned it. I thought of my younger self, grinding through years of uncertainty, believing that success would one day buy security, respect, belonging. In some ways, it had, but not in the way I'd expected. Belonging, I was learning, wasn't granted. It was built. The charity gala table I bought had promised access. What it delivered instead was clarity. It stripped away a fantasy and left me with a choice. I could keep knocking on doors designed to stay closed, or I could walk away and build something that didn't require knocking at all. As that realization settled in, it no longer felt like rejection. It felt like redirection. And for the first time since that morning email arrived, I felt genuinely grateful, not to the gala, but to the moment that revealed what truly mattered. Time passed, but the impact of what happened never truly faded. It settled into me quietly, shaping how I moved through the world. I stopped chasing rooms where my presence needed justification. Instead, I focused on places where my absence would actually be felt. That shift changed everything. One afternoon, months after the gala incident, I received an email from someone I didn't expect. It was from a journalist who had been researching the culture of elite philanthropy. She had heard fragments of my story through mutual contacts and wanted to talk. At first, I hesitated. I wasn't interested in revenge or exposure. But something inside me said this wasn't about them anymore. It was about truth. We met at a small cafe, far removed from ballrooms and velvet ropes. I told her everything calmly, without bitterness. I explained how I bought a table, how I was confirmed, how I was quietly erased. I told her what hurt most wasn't losing access, but realizing how conditional acceptance could be, even in spaces built around charity. She listened carefully, taking notes, but also watching my face, my pauses. When I finished, she asked a simple question. If they called you tomorrow and invited you back, would you go? I didn't even need to think. No, I said. And in that moment, I knew it was true. The article came out weeks later. It didn't name the foundation directly. It didn't accuse or attack. It explored systems, patterns, unspoken rules. My story was one among many. Entrepreneurs. First-generation donors. People with means but without pedigree. The response was overwhelming. Messages poured in from people who felt seen for the first time. People who had always thought the exclusion was their fault. Interestingly, no one from the gala ever reached out after that. No clarification. No apology. Their silence confirmed more than any explanation ever could. Around the same time, the informal network I had been building began to take real shape. What started as conversations turned into collaborations. Small projects grew. A scholarship fund here. A community center there. Not glamorous. Not headline-worthy. But real. Tangible. Lives changed without a single champagne toast. One evening, I hosted another gathering. This time, it was larger. Still no dress code. Still no hierarchy. At one point, I looked around the room and felt something I had never felt at the idea of the gala piece. No performance. No proving. Just people showing up as they were. Someone raised a glass and thanked me for bringing everyone together. I corrected them gently. I didn't bring this together, I said. We did. Later that night, when the room had emptied and the noise faded, I sat alone and thought about that original confirmation email. How proud I had felt. How hopeful. How unaware. I didn't judge that version of myself anymore. They had done the best they could with what they knew at the time. The charity gala table I bought but was uninvited from was never really about a seat. It was about permission. Permission to feel worthy. Important. Included. Being uninvited forced me to understand something crucial. Permission was never theirs to give. Some tables are built to keep people out. Others are built to bring people together. The night I was uninvited, I thought I had lost something. In reality, I had been released. And that turned out to be the most valuable return on investment I've ever received.